You may have seen the government today, or a couple of days ago, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, launched their plan for the winter and all their contingency. Plan A, Plan B, probably undisclosed Plan C in relation to how the country is going to keep going during the winter if coronavirus continues to spread. But here at Talk of the Trinity, we don't need any contingencies because we only need Plan A, which is to keep delivering you with great Villa content today, next week, week after, all the way through the winter and beyond. So no need to worry that we are going to be staying indoors, because that works out very well for us because it's the best place to record. I'm Baz Barrett. With me, as always, is Will Forrest, and welcome to the latest instalment of Talk of the Trinity. You'll be able to listen to us, hopefully, if everything technologically has gone to plan. This will be the first full episode, I should say, that is going to be released on Spotify. If you type in Talk of the Trinity, scroll through various religious listings and Irish colleges and their podcasts, you should see us there. And greeting you for your arrival will be the previous installment of the Ultimate 11. So you'll be able to listen to those individual snippets. And hopefully you'll be listening to us later on in this podcast talk about the centre midfield, which is going to be the next spot that we discuss and which is going to be up for grabs. We're also going to be talking to an Everton fan later on, and we're going to be delving into all things Everton, see what they think of their start of the season and their predictions for the Saturday night game on Sky. So looking forward to speaking to Talking Toffees there. And we're going to be giving our thoughts on the Saturday just gone, delving into Chelsea Villa. Well, before we delve into Chelsea Villa, just going to give a personal shout out, personal dedication to my granddad who passed over the weekend. We're going to do a podcast later on in the season, probably, about how me and Will both got into supporting Villa. And spoiler alert, it is largely down to our families and, respectively, our respective granddads. Granddad, massive Villa fan, probably one of the few things he remembered by the end, bless him. And we're going to be having a claret and blue themed funeral when that happens. So just wanted to give a shout out to another Holte in the sky who will be hopefully looking down and listening to us. But hopefully not too disheartened by the first topic we're going to be talking about this week, which is Chelsea Villa. So Saturday night on Sky, Chelsea 3, Villa 0. The result was what I predicted if you listened to the podcast we put out just before the game. But I'll admit that the game did not go quite the way that I thought it would. And I don't know about you, Will, but I thought Villa played really well, especially in the first half.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think I said something similar on the podcast where I said that anything 3-0 or less, you wouldn't really be able to blame the fact that that we didn't have Martinez and whatnot, or you could blame it on that. It's been that long ago since we recorded, but we played really, really well. We created a lot of chances. That high press caused them no end of problems, especially John Mcginn joining in with that one tackle that he did on Sol that led to Ings misplacing a pass to Watkins. It just seemed to set the epitome for the first half performance, in my opinion, and we were very unlucky not to get 1 or 2 goals. I'm not sure whether you felt that we should have been ahead at half time or at least on level terms, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, it's very rare you have a game losing 3-0 and you think you should have won. I think 3-0, as you said, it wasn't really a reflection on the game at all. Mcginn, for me, was our man of the match. I mean, Saul got absolutely terrorised in that first half and got hoiked. to the bench. But yeah, in terms of we should have scored 2 or 3, especially in the first half. It was just, you could say, unfortunate the way the chances fell. Watkins perhaps just feeling his way back into full fitness, full form. One of them was a great save by Mendy. The other, I think Watkins should be doing better. And there was some tantalising links or potential link up between Ings and Watkins. Overall, Ings, I don't think, really got into the game, unfortunately, which is hopefully, if we are going to have this system whereby Ings and Watkins play together, hopefully they'll be able to address that moving forwards. But unfortunately, we were talking about in the preview about how Chelsea, one of the favourites, if not the favourite for the title, and we are not in that same space yet. So our season won't be judged by the results at Stamford Bridge. But really, it demonstrated why Chelsea are going for the title, and we're still a bit way behind, because they were absolutely clinical in terms of their finishes, Lukaku in particular. But we did shoot ourselves, well, not just in one foot, in both feet, really. I mean, in terms of the first goal, I think it's great centre-forward play by Lukaku, but Townsend sold himself a bit there twice, and then he's ended up looking a bit more foolish than he should have done. But quality finish, keeper didn't have any chance. Second goal, poor defending, unfortunately. We've mentioned before, Mings has a ricket in him, and you've got to accept it if you're going to take the positives that Mings brings to the team. But unfortunately, Saturday, that ricket, it really cost us any chance of getting back into the game, especially so early in the second half. After that, we gamely played on. I don't think Chelsea looked like they were going to run away with it, but in terms of us getting a positive result, I think the game was up at 2-0. And then third goal, great finish. Again, I think the way he kind of dug it from under his feet, Lukaku, and put it top corner, I don't think the keeper had any chance. And I think that was one of the things we touched upon, whether Martinez not being in the game would make much of a difference. We were a bit fearful about that. But to be honest, I don't think Steer could be blamed for any of the goals. I think in terms of the second goal with the back pass from Mings, despite the mistake from Mings, the only way I think Kovacevic was going to score is if he hit it first time and put it in that exact place. And, he'd try that again 20 times, and I don't think he'd get it on target, let alone kind of score for at least half of them. So he got beaten by the only place really he was going to get beat, which, is just one of those days, really. And I think attacking wise, we were wondering what would happen with one day or not the team, especially in the first half. Very little attacking difference, really. We looked really good, kind of creating the chances. Second half, Bailly came on, looked good, in terms of got a booking out of Alonso, making him look a bit stupid. But yeah, it's overall, I'd say the performance was one to be proud of, but frustrating in the sense of just individual mistakes. It leaves a tantalising glimpse in terms of if we can piece together in 90 minutes, then I think we could give pretty much anybody in the league a match. I don't know if you think you'd put our chances and performance up at that level.
I think most definitely. Really, to be honest with you, there's a lot of people who have said that Chelsea are title contenders, and they are. But I think that there's stronger teams than them personally, which we may come to if ever we do a different type of podcast episode where we talk about everybody in the league. And to be honest with you, I'd be more fearful of Man United at Old Trafford in a couple of weeks' time, even playing the way that we did in the first half. Though, as you say, the links there with Watkins and Ings, it was the start of things. It would take some time, especially with Watkins coming back to full fitness. Danny Ings has only played as a lone striker for us since he's joined, and that's all Watkins is known as well, really. Whenever we've brought another striker on, they've always shifted him out wide to the wing. So the performance definitely should give Villa fans heart. Yes, Tyrone Mings made a mistake, and there are some right idiots on Twitter that you see doing a compilation of Tyrone Mings' mistakes since he's been playing for Villa, and you think, well, you're obviously not a fan. You know, if you can do that to somebody who gives his all every game. But like I've said before, and I'll stick by Mings, every player has got a mistake in them. It's just a shame that he's get highlighted so much. People forget about the time the first season we came back up that he managed to get behind Tom Heaton at Man City away, and Nia shot over the bar, the overhead kick off the line. Again, I can't remember which team it was against, but last season, the countless times he's put his body on the line for us. Thinking back to the playoff final, when he got injured, I think it was in the build-up to Derby's goal, he had to go off after literally putting his body on the line. He's a man-mountain of a defender, but he needs help from his centre-backs also. You could say that the pass from Townsend to him wasn't the best, but Ming should have put more on it. It's one of those things. It's happened. Chelsea seemed to be comfortable from then. I agree. They never looked like they were going to run away with it. We didn't really threaten their goal too much, apart from Watkins' effort that Mendy handled quite comfortably straight at him, and Traore belting one wide. But there were still positives, as you say. We still created a few chances. Who knows, if Ings had stayed on for a bit longer, would he have got a sniff around the box? And Leon Bailey looks an absolute class act. And one of the other great things was we didn't give up. A lot of teams at 2-0 down or 1-0 down to Chelsea would have rolled over and accepted defeat. But it doesn't look as though we're that type of team anymore, does it, mate?
No, especially after the first goal in the manner it went in. As you said, it could very much have been this is a long afternoon job. But yeah, we came out really strong, and we touched upon it in the preview that we weren't entirely sure how Villa were going to line up because of the different formations that were now available to Dean Smith because of the players that have been brought in over the summer. One of the criticisms that's been made of Dean Smith historically is that he is tactically not particularly fluid, not particularly kind of original, not particularly kind of creative, as opposed to reactive. What did you think of the decision to play? Well, you can either call it 5 at the back or 3 centre backs with 2 wing backs, and especially in that first half, I would say the formation worked very well. What did you think?
Definitely worked very well. We've got probably 2 of the better wing backs in the league. I'm not saying that they're Champions League class or even Europa League class, but they are 2 of the better attacking wing backs, full backs in the league. Though I'll be honest with you, I was quite shocked that Ashley Young didn't start as wing back, because we know from his previous time at the club that he can whip a crossing from that left-hand side. He can also cut in and get a goal or 2. I'm sure you remember as fondly as me the drop of the shoulder, getting past 2 Birmingham City players and scoring in the 5-1 win. Though, to be fair, Rudiger and Thiago Silva would probably be a little bit harder to bamboozle that way. The 5 at the back looked good, though. The 3 in midfield worked very hard. Douglas Luiz didn't play as a holding or defensive midfielder. He joined in, got stuck in, very much central, didn't push on too much, but he wasn't dropping really deep, I didn't think. The question for me is, can you fit Bailey and Buendia into a 5-3-2 come 3-5-2?
I'd say fitting Bailly, Buendia in the team together, I think realistically, I don't know if you can play 5 at the back and 2. I mean, mathematically, you can play 5 at the back and two up front if you're playing them together. But I think in terms of the midfield read the way that could potentially work in a lineup. I think Bay Bundia would have to be more central, I think, for that to work, because I'd have Traore on the right in terms of having that as a midfield three. I think works very well, but evidently you're not then really the most defensively sound kind of in the world, even though Bundia will get back a bit. But both Traore and Bay came off the bench. Bay made the more eye-catching kind of presence, but I was pleased to see Traore get stuck in. I think realistically that call it right midfield or right of an attacking three, or depending what formation we play, I think he's in our strongest 11, I would say. In terms of mention Ashley Young, I think we both had him in the preview 11s. Obviously didn't play. Matt Targett did. Talked about Matt Targett a couple of times so far this season. How do you think Targett did in this game? And I suppose more importantly, do you think he did enough to see his name on the team sheet when we're playing Everton? Although we will obviously preview the Everton game in more detail later on in the podcast.
He definitely did enough. He definitely had a good game. You know, you can very much see what Smith was saying was the truth in regards to his first game against Watford, coming back from an injury, not really having a full pre-season. He played well enough to keep his place. I think any of them who started would feel a little bit hard done by if they don't keep their place against Everton, which means going for a 5-3-2 again, whether that's the tactics that we need against them, maybe we'll find out a little bit later on. Some insight from the Talking Toffees. So hopefully Dino's listening again. For me, you know, we've got two very good Premier League quality left backs there, and I include Ashley Young in that. We've also got Courtney House, who could play at left back if we absolutely needed him to. It'll be interesting to see what we go with on Saturday evening under the lights at Villa Park, and whether we have Ings and Watkins up top is probably the more is the question that's on more people's lips, I would imagine, and whether Leon Bailey's going to start.
Yeah, and speaking of players who may or may not start, I'm going to give a shout out to Jacob Ramsey for probably the most blatant, needless yellow card you're ever going to give away at that stage of the game, 5 minutes in, with that little cheeky tear. Then double kudos for arguing with the ref, so saying it wasn't a booking. I mean, it was probably the clearest booking you're going to see. But, you know, got to give the lad credit, you know, just for doing it so blatantly in front of the ref and then having an argument about it. So got a bit of spirit in there. Good on him, even though ultimately a little futile in the grand scheme of things. Though we've mentioned in terms of topics that we've already talked about a few times before, another increasingly dark cloud overhead and increasing speculation is in respect of Dean Smith. Reports continue to come out that the ownership consider he's on a little bit of borrowed time and that the position may be reviewed ahead of at the international break after our next 3 games, Everton, United, Spurs. We spoke about it previously. I think our consensus view was that too early to be negatively judging Smith, and it would be unfair to get rid of him at this stage of the season. Anything changed for you? I know we ran a Twitter poll on this, so it'd be interesting to hear in terms of whether the Twitter fans' opinion matches ours.
To be honest with you, for me, nothing has changed with Dean Smith and his suitability for the role at present. And there's a few reasons for that. Reason number one is it's still very early days in the season. We've had 4 games. We've played 3 teams that we probably would have wanted to have gotten a result against. But when you think that we've got players out injured, Bailey was out injured for one, Traore got injured in that silly friendly that they had against Liverpool. Target was injured as well, and Watkins. We've won a game, so at least we're not languishing on 1 point right at the bottom of the table. But on top of that, he's had to come to terms with new formations, new players, not having everybody fit and available for him. It just seems a little bit harsh to be calling for his head at the moment. The Twitter followers so far, and there's still a good few hours remaining on this, so it may change by the time we put the podcast up and available to everybody. But at the moment, 18% of people have said, where the question was asked, as Talk of Dino being under pressure and needing to show we can get points on the board going into the next international break, do you think this is fair, Villa fans? 18% have said, yes, it's fair, well done, NSWE. 32% have said, give him till Christmas. And 50 have said, no, Dino's the man. For me, Dino needs until at least Christmas. And then from when we get to that December sort of time, we've had a few easier games, maybe after that 3rd international break, that's when we decide whether to pull the trigger or not. It's not just the players, though, that he's had to contend with bringing new players in. It's also his backroom staff. He's lost 2 big characters in O'Kelly and Terry. He's brought in Danks, and he's also brought in McPhee. And you hope that they will work, but they're 2 different types of coaches. Maybe he needs to bring in an ex-Villa player, a Melberg, a Larsen, as we've mentioned before. But I suppose time will tell, but I think it's too soon at the moment to give him his P45.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in terms of the next 3 games, United, Spurs and firstly Everton, I don't think you can really judge him based on those 3 games. And getting rid of Smith is only half the battle in terms of you then got to find somebody to replace him. And realistically speaking, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head who I can honestly say, one, that they're a realistic target, and 2, that you can say, yeah, they're definitely going to improve the team, and we're going to go from roughly where most fans think we're going to come this season, kind of that 9th, 10th, 11th kind of area of the table, to European qualification or Champions League qualification, which is part of the longer term plan for the owners. And if we're not going to get somebody to turbocharge us up there, I mean, I don't think you can compare the situation to, funnily enough, Chelsea in January. They had Lampard in charge, 9th, not really picking up results in the big games, defensively looking a bit of a mess, frankly. Get rid of him. Tuchel comes in, win the Champions League a few months later, instantly tightens up the defence. At the time, that looked an obvious managerial switch because Lampard, I think it was clear, wasn't good enough for the expectations that Chelsea had. Tuchel had experience of delivering success at a higher level, and that's what Chelsea needed. And they identified him. He was available. They went and got him. Didn't mess around in terms of Lampard once it became clear that he wasn't going to be able to get them to the stage they wanted. And they were justified in that decision, Chelsea. I don't think the situation's the same for Villa. I don't think there's anybody who's going to really get that magic pill up to Champions League in a year this season, or Europe this year in a season, or have a significantly different impact, especially at this stage of the season, that Smith will do. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't give it till this international break. Obviously, if coming up to Christmas, we're looking in the bottom three and not picking up any points, then yeah, I think you can make a legitimate point at that stage to say maybe Smith's taken us as far as we can. But I think at this stage, I think we're way too early for that. And I think once we get everybody fit, once we get the system kind of fine-tuned, judge him on that series of results. And if we're picking up the points, then yeah, I don't think there's any need to change, regardless of what happens in the next 3 games. I mean, I think realistically, I mean, that's the games that have been focused on in these immediate reports. But you look after the international break, we got Wolves, Arsenal, West Ham, Southampton, Brighton, Palace, and then City. That takes us up to the end of November. I think that's a much more realistic spread of games to be able to judge Smith. I mean, then if you're going on to December, Leicester, Liverpool, Norwich, Burnley, Chelsea, Leeds. So it gets a bit trickier in December. But yeah, I mean, I think next 3, way too early to be judging. See where we are at Christmas, or potentially before Christmas if October, November doesn't go particularly well. Although, of course, if Arsenal beat us, then you automatically deserve a sack because Arsenal are terrible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're right. The run of games going up to that period with Southampton, Brighton, and the likes of Arsenal and West Ham to play, you are expecting to pick up a lot more points. And funny enough, when you said you're not sure who would look at to replace them, 2 of the managers who manage teams within that run of game are probably 2 that would get considered. I think it's way too early to talk about it, but just to say, in case I can go, well, I called it here first. If Dino does unfortunately lose his job, Graham Potter and Ralph Hasenhüttl. Those are just 2 names, but yeah, it's too soon. Give him a chance. Give him until that international break in November, at the end of November, whenever it is. I'm not too bothered about international football, to be honest with you. And then review the situation. If we're in the bottom 3, languishing, fair enough, especially with players of the calibre that we've got.
Speaking of giving things time, that brings us on perfectly to us talking about past times. And hopefully you're giving us the time to allow us to regale you of our ultimate 11, which looks back at Villa in the Premier League and a bit of the Championship to decide upon the best Villa 11 since 1992-93, when football began, when the Premier League was formed. If you check us out on Spotify and also on YouTube, we have been making our way through the team in the last few weeks, starting with the goalie. We've got the defence sorted now. Left back, right back, 2 centre backs. We've put our team up, and then the fans have been putting their team up. And I think we'll correct to say, in terms of, we had a bit of a cliffhanger in terms of the left back, whereby we put Staunton and J. Lloyd Samuel up to the public votes to decide who made our ultimate 11. What was the result of that poll?
So, yeah, we put it out to the fans, and the fans decided that they preferred your option to me, to be completely honest with you. Your option, of course, being Steve Staunton, my option being J. Lloyd Samuel. And looking, just scrolling through the timeline now, actually, to see what the final result was, it was pretty unanimous, to be honest with you. It was 93% Steve Staunton, 7% J. Lloyd Samuel, which just goes to show that most of our followers on Twitter were born before football began. And Steve Staunton as well, he kept his crown, or it was replicated, if you like, in the Twitter followers team, because he picked Alan Wright, J. Lloyd Samuel, and also Matt Targett into their starting 11. So he's lining up alongside Paul McGrath, Olaf Melberg, and Mark Delaney, for them in front of Emi Martinez, but for us in front of Mark Bosnich, which strangely is the only difference we had. I imagine that, like me, you thought that there may be potentially a few different players in different formats, in different positions.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going onto the same script so far that they were all following. Maybe we'll need to try harder with some of our picks and do that fine line between players who don't quite make the worst 11, and just to try and get some different variety. But how we're going to get that variety is we're going to split the Premier League and the Championship era into 3 decades: the 90s, early 2000s, so from 92, 93 to the 2001-2002 season. We're then going to go from 2002, 2003 until 2011, 2012. And then we're going to go from 2012, 2013 to the present day. In theory, and we'll see how the next half an hour or so goes, we're going to have one selection from each era. Although, being as though we do need to pick 2 centre midfielders, we may end up having the runners and riders in terms of the ultimate selection on the Twitter vote between 4 players. Well, we'll see how we go. We'll see how many decent centre midfielders we can find. But the only stringent rule we have in place is that if you only played for Villa on loan, then you don't qualify for the team, although you may get an honourable mention. And another rule or determination that we're going to have to decide upon right now does link with a loan player, because we mentioned we're talking about centre midfielders. I suppose the decision for us, Will, is does James Milner qualify for the centre midfielder and the right midfielder? Bear in mind, you only get one shot in this game. You only are allowed to be considered for one position. Are we going centre midfield? Are we going right midfield? I know we've put the vote out on Twitter, which is still running at time of recording. Are the fans as split as we were, or is it looking pretty unanimous?
From the fans' point of view, and I'll be completely honest with you, the first vote I put out asked whether Jake Milner was a right midfielder or a centre midfielder, and a lot of people voted regardless. Jake, if you're listening, good luck with the rest of your career. I changed it because of my sausage fingers, and at time of recording, 45 votes, 31% say right midfield and 69% say centre midfield. For me, James Milner has been associated with central midfield since his final full season at the Villa, and then joining Man City and joining Liverpool, where, of course, he has transitioned into a fullback from time to time. But that first season at the Villa, where he signed for us, and also that loan season, he was predominantly on that right of midfield. Gareth Barry would have been in the centre. Alongside Barry, we're probably looking at Rio Coca or Petrov, and then you've got Ashley Young out on the left-hand side. So for me, I'd say Milner's a right midfielder. I think, if I remember rightly, he played 37 games in the first season and 37 in the second season that he'd actually signed for us. So the same amount of games in both positions, though I associate him more with getting down the right and getting crosses in. He only really moved inside during that last season, and once he'd moved on. That's just my take on it. I don't know what yours is, mate.
It's a tough one, this, because my gut feel when I first thought about it was centre midfield, along with what the fans have said. But when I looked at the stats, as you said, in terms of, it was pretty much an even split in terms of centre midfield as opposed to right midfield. And as you said, if you include the loan spell, he did play more on the right, although it doesn't get you in the team. But the advantage of us making the rules is, in terms of such a tie-break situation, we could say we put those appearances in the mix and it goes more right than centre. I mean, in terms of, because I think we're going to have plenty of centre midfielders candidates, and if the accusation is going to be that we're doing this to make it easier for ourselves, then I am very happy to plead guilty to that accusation, because I'm tempted to put him on the right wing just because I think we might need some more candidates to consider on the right.
Most definitely. We haven't really had an abundance of talent on that right wing. We won't go into it too much. There may be one or two fan favourites who appeared there. Ulysses de la Cruz, of course, we put at right back in. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. I'm really sorry, Ulysses. But yeah, I think if we look at these central midfielders, we've definitely got more to choose from. And looking at that first period, that 92-93 to 2001, 2002 period, there's a lot of players there to choose from. Some absolute barnstorming midfielders for us, and some who were a waste of space, about as much use as a wet paper bag.
Yeah,
so anybody who you thought was standout candidate there?
I'd say in terms of the 90s, looking through it without wishing to spoil what comes next, this was actually the golden age, I think, of centre midfielders for Villa in the last 30 years, because there's plenty of players you can throw in there. I mean, I anticipate who your pick's going to be, so I'm going to step aside from him to leave you to do the brand reveal. But in terms of other candidates, I think in terms of, if you're looking at natural flair, natural ability, obviously you can't go too much further than Paul Merson in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, the accusation could be he was more of a moments man rather than a consistent, 90 minutes man, or, putting it through a consistent number of games on the trot. But man, those moments, I'm all in. I mean, there's some absolutely cracking goals in there. You've got, in terms of your traditional kind of centre midfield, kind of the heartbeat of the team, the captains getting stuck in. You got a couple of those. Kevin Richardson, very underrated player now, because he was very early on in the Premier League era and left in the season after we lost. Not lost, the opposite. After the season we won the League Cup final, kind of in the transition to the Brian Little era. And also Andy Townsend, who was captain when we won the second League Cup in '96, if I remember correctly. And, he was so well known for his performances for Ireland during that period. You've also got, in terms of, I suppose you could have an argument also about where this player played, but I'm going to give a shout out to Lee Hendry. Always good to see a young player coming through the ranks and, kind of at the back end of this era, establishing himself in the team. In terms of personal favourites, they're not going to go down in the Hall of Fame. You got Mark Draper. He was one of the 3 big money signings we had in the 95 summer. And, if you want a guy to pass the ball, kind of sideways, which is a bit kind of maligned at the time, but, just kind of nowadays, the, keeping hold of possession, the short, tidy passes is a bit more respected than perhaps what it was then. And you've got Mr. Goal of the season himself, George Boateng. I mean, for a few seasons, he was our midfield enforcer until he also decided that Middlesbrough was the place to be with Southgate and Hugo. So got a few there in terms of potential candidates. I think I've left the floor open for who I'm anticipating is going to be your main man, and potentially who the fans' main man the fans' main man is going to be for this era. Let me hear you say Sasa Churchich.
All right, Gareth Barry.
That was a great pick.
He's who I was actually going for, so we've messed that one up. Sasa Churchic, mate, came with all the fanfare, didn't he? After he ripped it up for Bolton, we thought he was going to do quality with Savo, and it never happened. Every player you've mentioned there is a great candidate, I think, and I appreciate you leaving the one for me. Ian Taylor, he's surely the epitome of one of our own. Scoring on his home debut, that diving header against Chelsea in a 3-0 win, my first match I can remember, going to the Villa, wore number 17, then transitioned into our number 7. He was the typical arrive late and hit the ball from the edge of the box and grab a goal. He was always good for a goal, was Ian. He's an ambassador for the club now, going around meeting all of the Lions, the international Lions. Not that that's going to get him into the team. It's more the fact that he was very much a box-to-box midfielder, wasn't he? You'd see him getting back and throwing in slide tackles. You'd see him getting forward and scoring goals. And he scored some important goals, none more so than the second in that League Cup final win against Leeds. He scored against Atletico Madrid in the 2-1 win at home. Unfortunately, we went out. I can remember him scoring an 81st minute winner against Liverpool in front of the Holte when we beat them 1-0. He's just Mr. Aston Villa. Alan Villa is Mr. Aston Villa. You cut him open and he bleeds claret and blue. For me, the only ones that come close to him that you've mentioned, Andy Townsend, potentially. He was a proper leader. He was battle-hardened. You get surprised that he only played for us for 3 seasons, though he did win a cup in that time. I toyed with Lee Hendry, but Lee Hendry very much faded away, ending up at Stoke on loan. His debut obviously didn't go to plan when he got sent off against QPR away. And then Paul Merson. I've never really been a massive fan of Paul Merson until recent years, when you really appreciate what a technically gifted, creative footballer he was. Scored some lovely goals for us, as you say. The Everton goal in the last minute, and there was one against Watford where he pretty much ran diagonally across the pitch and lobbed their goalkeeper. Reminiscent in many ways to Dalian Atkinson, but without the players to beat on the journey. George Boateng, he did okay. I don't think he was ever going to trouble our central midfield spots here. But when you think that he, like another midfielder who we may get onto shortly, joined us as an attacking midfielder, but developed into a defensive midfielder, he didn't do too badly for us in the end. But Ian Taylor, for me, would be the pick from that from that decade. What about yourself?
I think I know where the fans are going in terms of the one for the 90s, but I'll toss up somebody else, just to keep it a fair fight. For me, it'd be between 2, Townsend and Merson. It is, it's a difficult one because they're both very different players, in terms of both added different things to the team. I mean, both played in cup finals. One was successful and the other wasn't. I'm going to, in terms of, it's also trying to anticipate who we might end up picking, later on, in terms of in the team. But close one for me. I'm going to go Merson, for the second one. I think we need a maverick in there. So let's get him in as the one who is potentially going to go up against Ian Taylor for the 90s. I mean, in terms of, we'll try and do something similar to what we did for the centre backs from recollection, which was end up with 6 names, narrow that down to 4, put them to the public vote and pick our final 2 out of there. So 90s, Ian Taylor, Paul Merson, let's put them in as lock. So moving on to the second decade, 2002, 2003 onwards until the 2011-2012 season. I think in terms of when we were talking about whether to include Milner, we probably named most of the centre midfielders who we might be talking about. But in terms of your pick for this decade, Will, who are you going for?
Well, personally, I think there's only two that you can really look at for this decade. Ian Taylor was coming towards the end of his time before moving on to Derby County. We would have picked him. Paul Merson didn't quite make this decade for us. To be fair, I would mention that we had Thomas Hitzelsberger, Mr. Shoot on sight, scorer of some crackers, and Stephen Davis. Let's not forget he started his career with us. He was a great central midfielder for us. Probably could have gone on and done a lot more for us if he hadn't have fallen out of favour and ended up joining Fulham at the time. Though I'll mention one of the two that I think it could be between, because I'd preempt that you're probably going to say the other one, though I could be completely wrong. And I'm quite used to being wrong, so that's fine. But for me, and it's going to be no surprise to you, it's going to be no surprise to a lot of people. It'll be no surprise to Russell from the Cayman Islands, Gareth Barry. Gareth Barry played a number of positions for us. Very fortunate that he got into the team because of David Unsworth wanting to be closer to home so he could get back in time for his tea, because Mrs. Unsworth didn't want to move to Birmingham.
She's obviously a great chef.
Well, apparently so. Those fish finger sandwiches, you know, she's a connoisseur for them. But Barry started left centre back in a back three, went to left back then for a while, moved out to left midfield, and it's from that position that he scored arguably his greatest goal for Villa when he went dancing very slowly past a number of Tottenham players before bending into the far corner. Though that wasn't the only time he scored a goal like that. He did it later on in his Villa career. I just forget which team it was at the moment. But then he moved to centre midfield. He got given the captaincy. We said that he got sent off against Portsmouth in that first game, scored a penalty. But he was a key player for us. Yes, there was that troublesome period where he came out and said he wanted to join Liverpool. And because of that, Martin O'Neill dropped him at the start of the season, stripped him of the captaincy, gave it away elsewhere. Barry managed to get himself back into the team, and due to an injury to our captain at the time, managed to get the captaincy back as well. He was the penalty taker. He was still the leader. He wore his heart on his sleeve very much, even though he was open to joining another team. And at the end of that season, after getting us, you know, as high as he possibly could, he decided that it was time to go and join Man City because of the project that they were offering him. It's not the first time that it was the first time that our captain went to join Man City. It's happened a couple of times since then. But Gareth Barry, he was the type of player who you could rely on. He was skillful without you realising it. He wasn't the fastest player, but he had a quick footballing brain. He didn't half know how to take a penalty. And he left his all on the pitch. For me, Gareth Barry is the best central midfielder that I have seen play for us at Villa Park in all of my time being a Villa fan.
It's interesting about Gareth Barry because you mentioned he left to go to Man City. And at the time, there was quite a lot of ill feeling about that from recollection. And there was a feeling at the time that perhaps his reputation may have been irreversibly damaged amongst Villa fans. But we did a Twitter survey, didn't we, Will, over the last few days in respect of a number of names detailing whether the fans thought that they were, we used the polite word plonker at one end of the scale to kind of club legend. And the rehabilitation, as it were, of Gareth Barry appears to be complete because the vast majority of votes put him down as legend, which I was quite surprised by initially. And in that same vote, and the latest player to have gone to Man City from Villa, Jack Grealish, the legend vote was quite low, which is funny enough. I think similar trajectory in terms of feeling amongst the Villa fans may repeat itself, because I think if you did that survey in 10 years, then I think Grealish is going to be higher up the list in terms of legends. But the thing about Gareth Barry, you just look at the numbers and it's the consistency, really, in terms of the number of appearances, a number of seasons for Villa. In terms of league appearances, 365. I mean, he played every game of his last season before he left for Man City. That was despite, trying, as you said, to engineer, if you're going to use that word, and move out of the club just earlier on. Total number of appearances for Villa, 441. That's in terms of you don't get that longevity anymore, and it's, don't want to sound old. And, Barry only left us 12 or so years ago. But in terms of in the Premier League era, is another player going to be playing that number of times for Villa? I don't think so, if I'm being honest. And in terms of going from 2002-2003 season, obviously they're not all going to be in centre midfield, but number of league appearances, 35, 36, 34, 36, 35, 37, 38. So real consistency for Villa. I mean, we certainly got our all from him on the pitch, and he left to go to Man City to win some trophies, which he did. Consistent performer for them, consistent for Everton as well when he joined them from Man City. So realistically, just on terms of numbers alone, and he settled in centre midfield where he became the most well-known, as we discussed when we were talking about whether to include him at centre-back or potentially left-back in earlier podcasts. We settled on centre midfield. Just that level of consistency alone really has to put you near the top of the list in terms of consideration for our ultimate 11. So not going to disagree with you there. In terms of alternatives, you mentioned Davis, you mentioned Hitzlberger. I think they're two examples of what ifs, in terms of if we wouldn't, Stephen Davis is still playing now at time of recording. I think Stephen Davis is still going to be playing in about 50 years time, once we're, kind of this podcast is, not permanently just kind of transported into your minds straight into the brain rather than via the internet. He will still be playing centre midfield somewhere just because of his longevity. So real, as you said, mistake to get rid of him for what we did. Hitzlsperger kind of fell out with the management as well. Real big loss for Villa. Really added something different, mainly thunderbolts from the edge of the box. But, in terms of, there's not many players who in the grand scheme of things, he didn't play 441 games for Villa, but I could probably name you 4 or 5 goals he scored off the top of my head, which in terms of, strikers who scored more goals for Villa, I probably could name you 4 or 5. So, a real kind of lasting effect on the club. Definite definition of cult hero, Hitzlberger. So I think I'm going to toss up really the only alternative I think you could put in for this decade. Honourable mentions to Gavin McCann, who I think, considering the money we paid for him, was decent, in terms of, especially that first season under O'Leary. I think he did a decent job. You may throw in Rio Coca. I think he scored a home goal against Chelsea that we won on a Saturday night game. So gets credit for that. I think he was okay, solid. I don't think, spoiler alert, he's going to go into one of my picks, for the centre midfield Hall of Fame. The only other one really you can throw in, I think, is Stilian Petrov. And difficult start to his career at Villa. Took him a while to get going, but once he did, very important player. And I think, it was really showing the impact they had when he wasn't there, in terms of that season under Alex McLeish where he wasn't available to play, and the applause for him at every single game in a real struggling team in terms of he would have walked straight into that team, no doubt about it. And he became a legend in Villa's fans' eyes, really kind of after that, really. I mean, he went down as, a very good player, but I think kind of the way he fought those battles, kind of elevated him. And then there was his attempts to get a contract back after he'd recovered that, unfortunately for him, didn't quite come to pass. But you got that goal against Derby, in terms of you don't see very many lobs from the halfway line. And I may have said something more about what Derby were doing kind of that season than potentially the opposition. But over 200 games for Villa in the centre of midfield, consistent performer, unlucky to be part of, probably the best Villa team of the Premier League era, and they not to win a trophy. I think that's unfortunate, but yeah, I think realistically, if you're looking for another candidate for the 2000s decade for centre midfield, I think you're looking no further than Petrov. I don't know what you think about that, Will.
Definitely. Stilian Petrov, I'm quite honoured to have gone to probably three of his most, I'd say, milestone appearances for the club, or three of his most memorable, if you like. I went to his debut against West Ham away, where he ran through and lobbed the goalkeeper at one point, and was thinking, what a player we've got, what a great attacking midfielder. Another funny thing from that match, not to do with Petrov, I was there with my mum. It was on Sky, ball went out for a corner. We were all very happy. Next thing you know, my mum's ducked, going, don't let them see me, I'm off work sick. I was there when he scored that goal against Derby, Petrov from the halfway line. And then with yourself and with my lad Jake, we went when we played Worcester City over in Stourport when he was trying to get that contract back, and he didn't really look out of place in that match. Okay, Worcester City aren't the greatest of oppositions, but it gave you hope, and it made you believe that anything is possible. It was obviously devastating news for him to get cancer at such an early age, and unfortunately for his football career to end. He came back as a coach for a little while and then had to step aside. But watching a couple of the Icon videos with him in from a couple of seasons ago when we were in the Championship, and him saying that he just wants to get back to Villa and he wants to coach, he wants to give something back to the club, such as his love for it. And to think that he's got such love for a team that he joined and struggled at for a good 6 months, when he came from Celtic as a living legend, it just goes to show the measure of the man, what a player he is. I can't argue with you putting Petrov in. He scored some vital goals, always gave 100% as well. He was very much like a Gareth Barry. He probably doesn't get as much credit as Barry because he wasn't here as long as him. But there's no doubt in my mind that if he'd have carried on playing, that we wouldn't have had those difficult seasons immediately following him having to stop playing football.
Well, we're going to come on to some of the players who played in those subsequent seasons. I think Petrov probably on one leg would have been better than some of the candidates that we had playing in that centre midfield in his absence. So on that spoiler, we'll go on to the final decade of consideration from 2012, 2013 up until the present day. There's a lot of names who play centre midfield for Villa during the last decade. Most mediocre at best. Funny enough, I think in terms of potential candidates for inclusion, in terms of the names that we've gone for, we haven't really veered in terms of our ultimate 11 too much towards the present day in terms of the present players. I think for centre midfield, in terms of looking for candidates for the last decade, I think you've got to veer towards players who have played for Villa very recently or still playing for Villa now. Because I was looking through the candidates, in terms of some players from the last decade. Name top of my list is John McGinn. I mean, that's also quite conveniently timed in terms of the performance he put against Chelsea on the weekend. So he's in the good books. But obviously joined us in the Championship for what must go down as, one of the best bit of business that, any club's done, let alone us, in terms of the last, even going back over this period that we're talking about for the ultimate 11. I mean, 2-3 million. I mean, that's nuts compared to what he's contributed. Comes in to the team, get promoted that first season, really brings a bit of drive. First season in the Premier League, if you really wanted to stretch the point, when he gets injured is when it goes downhill for Villa. That game just before Christmas where he was a bit too keen, shall we say, against Southampton, managed to get himself injured. And that was the end of that. But since going slightly deeper, really, in the team in terms of position over the last year or so, especially this season, I think he's really shown his ability, his tenacity, no shortage of skill, but really puts a shift in. Got a decent finish on him, as evidenced this season against Watford. But I think in terms of where we are as a club in the present day, and you're looking for players that envisage what you want a club to be and where you want it to go, I don't think you can look too much further than Mcginn, to be honest. And we've got a few other honourable candidates that, we'll throw out there. But yeah, he's number one for me in terms of the last decade. Definitely. I mean, who have you got on your list, Will, near the top for the last 10 years?
John McGinn was on my list as well. 2.5 million. What an absolute steal. And he's done it from the off. He scored big goals for us. Is he a legend already with that playoff final winning goal? Arguably. He scored in big away games in that first season in North London against both Tottenham and against Arsenal. As you say, he scored against Watford, so he likes scoring in London. He's all action. Again, he's very much like a Petrov, Barry central midfielder, really. He has got bits of skill. He will put a tackle in and he will get forward and he will run and run and run. And at the moment, he looks fitter than he has done for a very, very long time. Apart from them, there are some honourable mentions. I'm going to name one player who I'd put down as my bogey team list, if you like. But when he was given a run in the side and when he got the captaincy, he did very well for us. Scored the winner in the FA Cup semi-final against Liverpool. Fabian Delph was a leader when we needed him to be. Signed that contract to guarantee us at least a little bit of money when he joined Man City. That doesn't sound too unfamiliar, does it, to somebody else? He did well. He was a hot prospect when he joined us. Around that same time, and I'm not saying that this person is going to be considered for the central midfield, but I think we should point out and give credit where credit's due to a player who came to us from League Two and he's still in the Premier League now, Ashley Westwood. He was never a defensive midfielder. He was never a box-to-box midfielder. He was very much a deep-lying playmaker. Michael Carrick, give me the ball, I'll pass it on. I'll play it long. I'll knock it about for you, but don't expect me to be putting slide tackles in. Don't expect me to be scoring too many goals either. A lot of fans got on his back towards the end of the Premier League season where we went down. He scored 2 goals against Southampton at home. And the one thing that I think endeared him to fans, if you can say he's been endeared to them, is when we lost to Man United and it was confirmed relegation, he scored a free kick, but he actually went over to the fans and clapped them in front of where they were situated at Old Trafford. he didn't try to engineer a move away. It just so happened that the manager at the time in the Championship felt that, he should be afforded the move. We brought in Aaron Tish-Bowler, if you remember him. So Westwood went off to Burnley. Apart from Mcginn, though, really, following his performances after Project Restart and also at the start of this season, Douglas Luiz, though he's probably not a candidate for this Ultimate 11, but come back and talk to me in a year or two's time, and hopefully we're saying that he's the linchpin in the team that has helped us break back into Europe. I think the only other person who could really rival John McGinn is another left footer from close to home, well, from Ireland, if you like, and that's Conor Hourihane. Hourihane has always put a shift in for us. He probably wasn't quite Premier League standard, really, but in those Championship years, he was a force for us. He scored a lot of goals. The hat-trick against Norwich, breaking 10 goals that season. The winner against West Brom, when we beat them 2-1 in the first leg of the playoff semi-finals. His goal against the Blues when we won 2-0. He left on the right terms as well with his Instagram post. He's obviously not coming back to the Villa now. That's him done, unless we do a Brad Guzan with him. But he was a player who created some moments with his passing ability, with his 100% performances as well, even if they weren't quite up to the standard that we needed. So for your consideration also, I'd put Conor Hourihane there to be discussed, though I don't think he will be troubling the four, really, despite how well he did for us and what an influence he was in the Championship. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I say Hourihane, very good Championship performer, especially in what is almost a forgotten season now, the season where we got to the playoff final and lost 11 goals in the Championship that season. Real important performer. You mentioned some of the other key goals in there, and real kind of reliable player really in those Championship years. Real attacking force as well. I think he's certainly up there in terms of the last 10 years. I mean, in comparison to some of the other players I mentioned, I agree about Douglas Luiz. I mean, I think in a couple of years, if he's still there and keeping that consistent performance, then he'll be worthy of a discussion. Realistically speaking, he's just finding his feet now. How long may it continue? In terms of Fabian Delph, 2 good seasons for Villa. I mean, I think in terms of, you mentioned the Cup semi-final goal, that's probably his highlight at Villa. I think in terms of my personal recollection of Delph, I remember in the League Cup semi-final against Bradford when the ship was going down. One of those moments in football when you're in the crowd and somebody does something and you just absolutely lose your shit. And I remember losing the proverbial at Fabian Delph in the Holte end. Most the people had already left by that stage. It was near the end of the game. We pretty much already resigned ourselves to defeat. The remaining people in the stand, it encouraged them to leave because they were like, this guy's absolutely losing it about Fabian Delph. I mean, this obviously is not a safe situation for us to be in. But yeah, I mean, I say Delph, we talked about in terms of the way Barry, Grealish got their moves to Man City, and time has been kind to Barry, potentially will be kind to Grealish for his contribution. I think Delph, unfortunately, falls into the worst of both camps. In the way he got his move was probably the worst out of the three. And I think in terms of his contribution to Villa compared to the other two was the least out of the three, even though, as you said, he did have some moments. But unfortunately, I don't think his reputation has been re-established enough to get him a consideration here. Westwood, you mentioned, if he was the other midfielder in a better team, then I think his contribution would be better remembered by Villa fans. But I think the fact he was the main man in that struggling team, he wasn't good enough, frankly, for that. You see at Burnley, obviously got a career in the top flight, very regimented system. Each player knows what they're doing, very, you do this, you do that. And he's fitted in perfectly fine. But I think in terms of, some of the real classic midfielders we've mentioned for Villa in the 30 years, unfortunately, I don't think he reaches those levels. I think there's a few in terms of what might have been. Drissa Gay, very good. I talk about a sinking ship. I think the ship sunk before he even left the port kind of that season, but disappointing that, he wasn't able to shine in a better team, in terms of, I think he'd be arguably fit into the team now, his quality. And then you're really looking in terms of a real kind of just, you throw out a couple of names who played centre midfield for Villa in the last decade. Yakuba Silla, Karim El Amadi, Carlos Sanchez. That's that's where you're kind of getting to. I mean, you got Jordan Veretout, he's done to better things. Mili Jedinak, solid enough. And then you're kind of scraping the barrel in terms of loan players. Josh Onomah, I mean, he's a forgotten player. He scored. Talk about Conor Hourihane scoring in that season where we lost the playoff final. Josh Onomah was an absolute fire kind of for us that season. And then it's kind of, disappeared quicker than, kind of Tony Z's bank card when he was asked to pay the tab at Wembley. You had Tom Cleverley join on loan. He did okay. I mean, there's a bit of disquiet when he declined to join us permanently. I mean, looking back, I don't think you can ever say you made the wrong decision based on what happened next. But no, I mean, in terms of, for me, the two from the last decade, I'd agree. I'd have Mcginn, I'd have Hourihane. But for me, out of those two, I'd go Mcginn.
Definitely agree with you there. I think if we're going to put two forward from it, then you do those. Veretout, which you say, and Ghana, what might have been with them. And as with Douglas Luiz, give it a few seasons, I'd be hoping we wouldn't be saying, or we wouldn't be comparing Morgan Sanson and Veretout to one another and saying that, lightning struck twice with them. Hopefully he sticks around and becomes a big player for us. And Jacob and Aaron Ramsey, you'd hope going forward, will be in that conversation. And speaking about that Chelsea game, JJ has given every hope that he will be discussed as a future ultimate villain. But no, I agree. John McGinn would definitely be my choice as well, with Conor Hourihane as a runner-up. So that leaves us with 6 then, mate.
Yep. So to recap, we got from the 90s, we've got Ian Taylor, Paul Merson. We got from the 2000s, Gareth Barry, Stilian Petrov. And we got from the 2010s, John McGinn and Conor Hourihane. But you maths fans will be well ahead in knowing that 6 does not go into 2. So I suppose in terms of starting the process of knocking 6 into 4, I'm going to throw in, the 2 who I'd kind of knock off, I suppose, to leave for the final 4. Out of those 6, I'd probably take off Hourihane and probably Merson first. What would your thoughts be of taking those off the table for ultimate 11 consideration?
Agree with Hourihane. And surprisingly, I'm feeling a bit bad about knocking Merce off, but I agree as well. He was there for the 4 years, and whilst he said it was the only time he ever cried when he left the team, which is obviously lovely to hear about your club, I agree with Merson. I'd have those same final 4 as you, and I think it's probably easier then to get it down to a final 3 from those 4. Don't know about yourself.
Yeah, in terms of obviously Merson, great player, but you need better than great to get into our team. So final 4, Taylor, Barry, Petrov, McGinn. I do actually think we may slightly deviate here, actually, of getting 4 into 3. Because in a real, I'm going to say controversial, you may agree or disagree. Who I'd probably take out next? I'd probably knock Petrov out next.
Wow. I wasn't expecting Petrov to go out next, to be honest with you. I was expecting John McGinn to go out next. But when you think of what John McGinn has done since he joined, it's a bit tough on him. Petrov, cult hero, maybe, rather than a legend for us, whereas McGinn, you could potentially argue that he's got 1 foot in legendary status. I'm happy for you to knock Petrov off next as our 4th, as we turn 4 into 3. Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yep. So 4 doesn't go into 2, 3 doesn't go into 2, only 2 goes into 2. So now we're left with the difficult decision of which 2 are going in to our respective ultimate 11s. So who are your final 2, Will? Who's getting the name on the chalkboard in the dressing room of your ultimate 11?
It's got to be Gareth Barry and Ian Taylor, my 2 favourite central midfielders, as well as James Milner. for Aston Villa, Gareth Barry and Ian Taylor for me just about beat John McGinn. Ian Taylor won the cup for us, played for us for a very long time, and ultimately, because he's had time on his side, did more for us than McGinn did. Gareth Barry, whilst he didn't win a cup for us, he helped get us back into Europe. He helped get us into top 6 finishes. He did more for us as an Aston Villa player. So, and for me, if I was going to make a player nowadays to put into that Villa centre midfield, or if I could bring any one player back from that I've seen, I'd always go for Gareth Barry first. So for me, it would be Barry and Taylor in that central midfield.
I mean, I want to say McGinn. I want to have a run at McGinn, but I'm looking in terms of, the contribution, looking at the numbers, in terms of overall contribution. And I know we were saying at the outset, we wanted, if possible, to try and, get some deviation away from agreeing all the time, try and get some variety in there. I'm going to have to agree with you here. I mean, I think it's going to have to be Gareth Barry, Ian Taylor for me as well. So I think, the streak of us largely being on the same page is going to continue here. But we may be on the same page here at Talk of the Trinity. It'd be interesting to see what the fans say. I mean, we're going to put the final 4 up for your vote. So the 2 we chose, Gareth Barry and Taylor, also John McGinn, Cillian Petrov. And so we'll see which ones make it into your ultimate 11. But a real nostalgic trip down memory lane there. Some great players, some long-serving players for the Villa cause in the last 30 years. Slightly more names to talk about than we did when we were talking about left back.
Most definitely. And for a first ever, that tweet is going live now. If you're listening to the recording after the day of recording, it's not going live now. It's already been on. It's probably been on for about 24 hours or so, by which time you're too late to vote. But of course, you can tweet us at Talk Trinity and tell us how wrong we are, and that Paul Merson or Matthew Berson should have been in that starting 2, or maybe Mustafa Salifu should have got in. But regardless of whether you're listening to us on YouTube, on our YouTube channel at Talk of the Trinity, or on our Spotify Talk of the Trinity channel, you're probably going to be a little bit too late to vote unless you're really, 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 really quick, like Leon Bailey quick. And at which time, why don't you nutmeg your mum as well as you log onto your phone to vote?
Nutmeg your mum. Heard it here first. Looking forward now then to the weekend's game. We mentioned it earlier. Villa Everton, 5:30 on Sky Sports, becoming a bit of a fixture for Villa. Though, speaking of teams who have been on Sky Sports, if you were watching on Monday night, Everton against Burnley, and we've got joining us now, Peter from Talking Toffees, Everton podcast. So thanks for joining us, Peter. Much appreciated. Guessing you enjoyed certainly the second half of your game against Burnley on Monday night.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, lads. Definitely the second half. The first half was tough. In fairness, Burnley with a better team. They were sharper. They were more hungry than Everton. And when they went in front, the second half, it looked as though it was only going to go one way. So delighted. It was a nice surprise to see that kind of character in the Everton team. It's been missing. So all in all, in the end, a good night, but it's still early days, isn't it? And I think, given how we defended that Burnley's first goal and the goals we've conceded up to now, it sounds like I'm being critical after a good 3 points. I'm still not convinced with our defence. That worries me, to be fair.
I mean, you do rarely get such a stark turnaround because they Burnley took the lead, and then by the end, Everton could have had 5 or 6. Looking on it, I mean, even Decore was trying to join in on the fun, kind of having a goal disallowed. But
it was really strange when the fourth one went in. It went from celebrating to just laughing. You know, the fans, the lads who were sat by, we were just saying now, burst out laughing. It was just a 10-minute spell that was not in keeping with the match at all. And you're right, you know, we did have chances. Andre Gomez should have scored. I haven't saw the highlights. Obviously, the game was late, so I've only saw what I saw at the game. But Burnley did have a goal disallowed. I'm not sure if that was the correct call, but overall, it was it could have been a bit of a cricket score in the end. But as I say, up until that, Burnley with a better team.
You mentioned a number of players there who are world famous, if you like, and you forget that they actually play for Everton. Andre Gomez, what a player. I mean, coming from Barca along with Yeremina at the time. And then you also, you mentioned Decore. I mean, I'd have loved him at the Villa when you got him, but I don't think there'd have been much chance for signing then. Who's been your key man at the start of the season so far, do you think?
Probably 2. I think Decore in particular. Benitez is definitely getting the best out of him. We started the season in 4-4-2, went back to basics, which is what often happens with a new manager. And I think Decore's excelled in a box-to-box role. Last season, Ancelotti played them in a position to protect James Rodriguez. James wouldn't get back and defend. It wasn't his game. It wasn't what Ancelotti wanted. So we used Decore to mitigate the fact that James wouldn't do that. This season, Decore is box to box, which I believe that is his natural game. And, you know, he was unlucky last night to not get on the score sheet again. But I think as well, Damari Gray, a bizarre sign in left field. I didn't know how to take it. I thought it was strange how Bayern Leverkusen was so content to let him go after only signing him in January. I thought there's a reason they're letting him go, but you can only judge it on up to now. And he's, you know, I said it at the match last night, at the time, if we would have spent 25 million on him, he wouldn't bat an eyelid at the moment. Obviously, early days, it's a honeymoon period, but I've definitely got to mention Damari Gray and Decore. I'd say they're the 2 key players at the moment.
And Damari Gray quite nicely ties in with, as our accents give away. We're from Birmingham. Damari Gray actually used to play his football at Cadbury World, which is literally a 5-minute walk from both of our houses. And to see how well he's done, and that goal on the opening day against Leeds as well, he has been a very good signing. Potentially, I suppose at the moment, the signing of the season contender.
Yeah, it's ironic, Will, because most of our fans were gutted when Villa signed Leon Bailey. He was the man that a lot of Evertonians just got into the head. It was the winger that we wanted. So when we approached Bayern Leverkusen, the Evertonians were saying on social media, we've got the wrong winger from Leverkusen. It should have been Bailey. So it's ironic. We ended up with Gray, and he's done the business. Don't get me wrong, Leon Bailey's a talent, and I would have loved him at Everton. But yeah, he's done well so far this season. I forgot he started out at Birmingham, so probably not a popular player on the podcast to be talking about.
He's okay because he's at Everton now, and because of being at Cadbury's as well, we'll let him off with that. But just before Baz asks you any more questions, it actually leads quite nicely talking about Bailey and how you wanted to sign him, and fortunately we have. There's been 15 players in the Premier League era, or in the Premier League, not era because we were in the Championship for a little while, that have played for both teams. So a little game for you. How many of those 15 do you reckon you could guess at and get right?
I'll go for 15 and I'll get egg on my face, but I'll have a go.
No, don't blame you. You've got to aim high.
Yeah. Right, do you want me to crack on, start?
Yeah. You give me one at a time and I'll let you know whether I've got that down as they did play for both.
I'll go with the most unpopular Everton player by a mile, Fabian Delph. He's not a liked man at all. Jolie Lescott.
Yep, not a very well liked Villa player in the end, but he had a great party trick of being able to tweet from his pocket when he played for the Villa.
Yeah, he had a nice car, didn't he?
He did, yeah. Very nice car.
Thomas Hitzelsberger.
Yep.
There's me saying 15 and it's slowing down already. Bear with me. What else have we got? Idrissa Gana-Gueye.
Yep.
Gareth Barry.
Yep. Yeah, Gareth Barry.
Yannick Bolasie.
Oh, he didn't play for us in the Premier League.
Oh, Championship.
Yeah, he did play for both. He only featured for us for probably about 3 or 4 months in the Championship. Unfortunately, I don't think we saw the best of him, and I don't think you did either, did you, really?
No. He had ability, it just didn't happen for him. I'm sure there would have been strikers that have played for both clubs, I think.
They said, not that this is going to help, but the striker is not the most obvious pick, or it wasn't for me anyway. When I had the advantage of seeing the list beforehand.
I'll be completely honest with you as well. I didn't have Fabian Delph on the list, so there's actually 16. But there we are.
I forget Fabian Delph played for Everton at times. He's such a liability. Right, I won't keep you all night. I'll have a more of a thing.
We'll pop in at the end, see if any more have come to mind. But
the match will be over by the time I think of any more.
So, I think we can give a clue. I don't think any of them currently play for either Villa or Everton. So we are having to go back into the history books. But and I suppose in terms of bringing it back to the modern day, I suppose probably one of the questions I'm guessing you might be anticipating being asked, or you've been asked a few times, maybe slightly sick of being asked it by now. Obviously, there was a bit of controversy, shall we say, when Rafa Benitez rocked up at Goodison Park this summer, based on what we may call previous. Yeah, obviously, you were at the game last night. How's he going down so far in terms of the fan base as a whole? Obviously, a good start to the season always helps in terms of being able to win over the fans. Winning over the doubters, or is there still a bit of hesitancy?
There is a hesitancy. It is the elephant in the room. I mean, last night the atmosphere was brilliant, and whatever your views are on Benitez, any football fan watching the game would admit that Benitez won Everton the game. We were playing with 3 centre-backs and it wasn't working. Now, most football fans would identify that, but what he done is he brought on Gomez, pushed Gomez on, and it created space, which when Benitez called for Gomez on the touchline, there was groaning because fans automatically wanted the centre-back off and Rondon on to just get another body up front when we were losing 1-0. But tactically, he was spot on. And when we played Southampton, he tweaked it there where he had Richardson out wide and Damari Gray up front. That wasn't working. So to answer the question, I personally think he will when the doubt is over. I feel as though it's amplified in the media. I don't know if it was the same for you guys when Steve Bruce came, and obviously he's got Birmingham City ties, but for us, no Evertonians, well, very few Evertonians wanted him, but I don't think there was the mass uproar that social media portrayed. The problem you have with social media is they're the loudest, they're the voice you see, but the fans who go to the game, it was a lot more level-headed. He's got history with Liverpool, but I'd be more worried if he won nothing at Liverpool and he was a failure. He was successful there, and he's a successful manager. I didn't want him at Everton, but he's here, accepted it. I do think from what I saw early on, he's a good tactician. My worry is Everton never spent any money in the transfer window. Well, they did. They spent £1.5 million, which in today's market is no money. So my worry is that with a threadbare squad, a couple of injuries, results don't go our way, and then all of a sudden Benitez becomes an easy target. When we went 1-0 down last night, it turned, and I think we needed to score when we did. So I think he will win them over, but yeah, there's a lot of doubt. I mean, all the chant last night was for Everton, and ironically, a guy behind me started chanting Benitez's name, and everyone burst out laughing. So we're not there yet. But yourself as as lads that go to the game, that when you get to the ground, you don't actually care too much. It's about the players that cross the white line, and that's all that matters really. So if Everton continue to play the way they are, and we're lucky with a lack of injuries, then I think Benitez will win them over.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of former Birmingham City managers in the last 10 years. I mean, you mentioned Bruce. I think for Bruce, it was obviously we win a championship by that point. It was I think there was an acceptance amongst most Villa fans that he was probably the best guy available to get us out, and nearly did. And then I think when things went wrong for Bruce, it wasn't because he was Blues manager that the fans turned. It was really just because I think there was a feeling we had quite an attacking set of players by that point and new owners, and we were playing very defensive football and we needed a bit of a change. I mean, the big one for Villa fans over the last 10 years, which I suppose is comparable, was when we got Alex McLeish over, but he had actually been manager of Blues. There hadn't been that gap in time. And I think obviously similar situation in terms of, had some Villa fans with bed sheets outside with things written on about McLeish, but ultimately, similar to yourself, when you're in the ground, you want to back the team. With McLeish, for us, ultimately, it was a terrible appointment, and it didn't really. And the fact that he was Blues manager previously, I think that maybe with some fans had less forgiving, less period for grace. But the reality is, we were terrible under McLeish, and it wouldn't have mattered who we had in charge by the end. The fans would have turned, I think, unfortunately. So it does come down to success on the pitch ultimately, and if you're doing well, I mean, if you're fourth at the end of the season, then I think you may run round a few of the doubters. No, so speaking of players on the pitch, we've had a few questions from our Twitter followers. one of which is in relation to Richardson. We've had Daz. I'm going to read out his question. He says, is Richardson as good as he's made out to be? Is he worth 50 million plus that has been quoted for him in terms of a transfer?
To answer the question, yes and no. I say no because at the moment he's not. But I say yes because I think you're buying his potential. He's still a young lad and he's still got a lot to learn. And you look at some of the players, across the park for us, Mo Salah, Mane, when they were a similar age to Richarlison, they were probably at a similar point in the career. I anticipate when Richarlison is 28 at his peak, I think he has the potential to be an elite player. He can score any kind of goal. He can play anywhere across the back three. His only criticisms I would have is he's petulant. He can lose his head quite easily. But I think that's a maturity thing. In terms of talent, I do think he can be worth that. Look, when he says he's worth it, obviously it's the current market and it has got silly. But I would say for what you could potentially get, and it all depends on if he reaches his potential, which I believe he will, then yeah, I'd say he is worth that.
And he looks to be one of your key players from an outside point of view. There weren't any other questions from Twitter followers except for myself, because I follow my own page because I'm sad like that. I wanted to get the numbers up. I got a question for you, and it sort of ties in with the Everton nickname of the Toffees, if you like. So you've been given this magical power before kickoff to toffify the feet of any one Villa player so that they're stuck together, and the only way that they can come undone is if they're subbed off and one of the under-23 starts nibbling away at their boots. Which Villa player is it that you're going to toffify their feet to stop their threat or stop their influence on the game, if there is one?
Yeah, it would have been easy last season, obviously, probably still raw with losing that guy. I would say Mcginn. I think he's Villa's engine room. I don't know if you guys agree, but when I watch Mcginn, he just seems to keep Villa ticking. So I think if you stop him, you stop Villa's engine room. That, you guys watch Villa more than me. You may feel that that's not accurate, but he just seems to be Villa's key man. I'm most fearful of Danny Ings because he's the striker I wanted at Everton. But I think the engine room is Mcginn.
Yeah, McGinn's had a great start to the season. He's gone back to that sort of old McGinn. When we first signed him, he got a nasty injury in the first Premier League season because he was a bit overzealous trying to put a tackle in on the Southampton player and injured himself. And I think you can hear on Match of the Day Baz shouting, "You plonker," in the direction of John McGinn. And Danny Ings, never in a million years would I have thought that we'd have signed Danny Ings at the start of the season. It's very much a football manager type of signing for a club like Aston Villa.
Sorry to interrupt, Will. Was there any rumours? Because it just seemed to come out of nowhere, like the old days where a transfer just happened overnight.
Came out of nowhere. Leon Bailey was kicking around for a little while when we signed him, as was Buendia. Townsend had started to, that was kicking around, but then it started to die a death. And before we had a friendly, there was just a picture of him with the shirt. Ashley Young pretty much came out of nowhere, but got wrapped up quite quickly once we'd heard about it. But Danny Ings, no, the first anybody heard about it was Danny Ings had been signed, and it was that quick. They hadn't even got a picture of him with the shirt. It was just a case of they signed Danny Ings, and we were all looking on Twitter to make sure it was the official account and not AVFC XI official instead of official.
Yeah, felt for them in my time. No, I think Danny Ings is a brilliant sign. And in fairness, I know you obviously don't want to lose your key man, but I think Villa was spot on, and they got all the ducks in a row before they sanctioned that move. And I think Everton will have that with Richarlison either next season or the season after, and I hope we do something similar. Spend the money first, and then you're not panicking.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, Richardson, as you say, he's that same sort of influence as Grealish, isn't he, really, for you. So when he does go, he'll go for big money. There was rumours, weren't there, of top Spanish clubs coming in for him. So it seems inevitable that within the next year or two, unfortunately, and without sounding disrespectful, somebody bigger will come in for him, those Champions League types of teams. But if you've, looking back at that game on Saturday, putting your neck on the line, what do you think the score's going to be? You won't offend us by saying you think Everton will win if that's what you think.
It's a tough one. I enjoy going to Villa Park because it's probably, as a club, most similar to Everton in terms of the history, the stadium. But I don't enjoy it when the fans are there and the fans are behind them. The Holte end, it's difficult. It is literally the 12th man. So I think going to Villa is probably how, maybe not last season, but in general, fans feel about coming to Goodison. You're up against it with the crowd. So it all depends on how Everton starts. If we started how we did Monday, we'll lose because with Villa's crowd, it'll be too much to turn it around. I hope we'll start how we finished last night. I would put my neck out on the line and say 2-1 Everton. But it is one of those games, isn't it, that I don't think anyone would be surprised if either team won it by a goal or it was a draw. I don't think there's that much between the teams. And if anything, I mean, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's out on Saturday, which is a massive blow for Everton. And because Lewin's out, I think Villa have got the better forward options. I'm not sure who's fit, but presuming all your guys are fit, then Villa have got a lot more to offer up front. So I think, I'd say Everton 2-1, but in all honesty, that's just out of hope. I think we can win, but it's a difficult one to call. It's still early in the season. I think for you guys, it's been a mixed start, but one of those games with Chelsea, which, I think you can count on one hand the teams that are going to go to Chelsea and win this season. So I'll say 2-1, but very difficult to call.
No, it's fair enough. I mean, I think it'll be one goal in it as well. I'm actually going to go for a couple more goals, and I'm going to hope that we can get a 3-2. I think that there might be a mistake in there from someone, whether that's Jordan Pickford for yourselves or Tyrone Mings for ourselves. Yet, ironically, they're both absolutely phenomenal for England when they play. What about you, Baz? What do you think the score will be?
I agree that it could be any one of three ways, really, and you wouldn't be too surprised. I mean, historically, we have quite a decent home record against Everton, but Everton obviously had the better start. I mean, I was fairly confident 45 minutes in on Monday night after seeing the first half, maybe not so much now. I think it's going to be a draw. I think it's going to be 1-1. I think it should be a decent game. Both teams are going to have chances. As you said, the start is going to be key. But I'm going to go for a draw. I'm hoping that it's not going to be a big Villa win, just because I might not be able to watch the game due to my commitment. So I don't want to find out that I missed an absolute classic. But I'm going to go 1-1.
And what about Peter, the season finishing? Do you see Everton finishing above the Villa at the end of the season? How do you see that going between the two teams?
It's a tough one because I think Everton's best 11, I'd say, we could finish above Villa. But I have major concerns about the lack of strength and depth. Everton were suffocated with financial fair play this summer. Their own fault. We've spent silly, and it's come home, to bite us eventually. I think Villa have got more options up top. I'll say because I'm a blue, and I'm feeling optimistic now. But I think 1 or 2 injuries. I mean, look, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's out Saturday, and right away you're looking at Everton's forward line, and you think Villa have got that edge now. So I'll say but for myself, not just in terms of Villa, where we can finish the season, I think top 10 is as good as it could get. based on the lack of quality, strength, and depth. But yeah, I'll keep it optimistic for the Everton side and say you can finish above Villa. But I don't think there's much between the sides, to be honest.
I think it'll be very close again, like it was last season. You've got a very good team there. You've got a very good starting 11 and squad of players. And I think a lot of Villa fans would say they've looked on quite enviously of you over those last 4 or 5 years when we've been in the Championship, thinking, if only we'd been looked after in the right way, as you have been with some of the signings that you made. When you see that you've signed Gomez and Yeremina from Barcelona, and you think, wow, the calibre of players that you sign in there, Digne as well, not to mention Richardson, we've definitely been looking on with green eyes. So, Everton very much a top half club, and I'd be surprised if they didn't finish in the top half.
What I would say, Will, to make Villa fans listen and feel better is there's been a lot of bad signings. I take your point that there have been some good additions, but I can reel off, Delph, Townsend, Schneiderlin. There's been a whole host of poor signings. But I think, obviously Villa had a few years in the Championship, but now, yourself, you look at them and the manager, Dean Smith, I think is an excellent manager, to be fair. And you only have to look at how Villa as a club have dealt with the sale of Jack Grealish. That I think those days, fingers crossed for you guys, they're over in terms of being the wrong end of the table. And it'd be nice, to be honest, it'd be nice if we got back to that rivalry that we had when we had Moyes and you had Martin O'Neill. It felt like they were derbies when we played one another, because whoever won, Villa and Everton, probably ended up fifth. So hopefully we get back to that. But I think both sides probably need to invest a bit more before we get to that level. But they were some good encounters with John Carew was an absolute pest. But they were good days, to be fair.
And there were some great games during that time. I remember you beating us at Villa Park 3-2 in early August one year, and the only thing I really remember, apart from the score, is James Milner scoring a worldie of a free kick. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, players who have played for both sides, James Milner, of course, has played in Merseyside, just not at Everton. Those 16 players, not 15, because you rightly pointed out Fabian Delph for us. We've got Gareth Barry, who you said.
I've got two more, sorry. Can I give you
carry on.
Two more?
Of course you can, yeah.
Just to try and get me rating a bit higher. Gavin McCann, did he play for Villa?
He did, yep.
And Richard Dunn.
Yep.
That's it. That's all I've got, but I thought I'll add to my score.
No, fair play. So that's a score of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 then. That is 7 because of Garner as well. So you've got Barry. Ross Barkley, of course, played for both teams. A little bit of a clue there in Baz's surname. Earl Barrett played for both.
Sadly not related.
Sticking with right back, Steve Watson. It was Tom Cleverley.
David Unsworth, did he play for Villa?
Well, he actually never played for us, apart from... Yeah. I was reading his story the other day. He played one friendly for us, but went to you pretty quickly. And I think we got a bit of a profit on him as well, because of what apparently his missus was like. Gareth Farrelly played for both teams. David Ginola played for both teams. Yeah. There you go. The only striker, Tommy Johnson, played for both sides. He was famous at Villa for being sick, even though he was only ever sick once on the pitch. Philip Senderos, and we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here, Carl Tyler, and that adds on to the ones that you said, Garner, Hitzelsberger, Dunn, Lescott, McCann, Delph, and Gareth Barry, who we've been having a chat about earlier when we were doing our Ultimate Villa 11.
I would never have got all of them, in fairness.
No, yeah. I didn't know until I looked at Villapedia.
Yeah, some classic players there and some not so classic. Really, I think it'd be fair to say.
Most definitely.
Though what was classic was tenuously linking it in there was our Everton Villa preview. So cheers for joining us, Peter. Much appreciated. And
Thanks for having me, lads.
And I hope you enjoy the game on Saturday up until the kickoff. And but then hopefully we'll have a chat with you later on in the season. And hopefully Rafa is still flavour of the month up there, and both teams are battling for 5th place.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, lads.
So you've heard all there is to hear from me and Will, and you've heard from Peter from all there is to hear about Everton. There's literally nothing else to talk about. So we may as well bring this podcast episode to a conclusion. Check us out on Twitter at Talk Trinity. Check us out on YouTube at Talk Trinity, where you'll see all the other episodes we've recorded so far this season uploaded. Check us out on Spotify, Talk of the Trinity. Hopefully there'll be a link up there soon on our Twitter page. Hoping to expand our podcast empire soon. So next couple of weeks, stay tuned for further announcements as regards where else you'll be able to find us. Keep up to date with all the Villa news on the Twitter page. And no doubt you'll be seeing all sorts of updates and polls and lots of things to keep you entertained ahead of next week's podcast, but more importantly, ahead of Saturday's game against Everton. Hope you enjoy it, whether you're at the ground, at the pub, or listening to on the radio or watching a match of the day. Thanks for listening. Hope to speak to you again soon. Up the Villa.